The American-Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee hosted its annual convention last week in Washington, D.C. Part of the event included two Democratic U.S. House candidates in Michigan and California. They talked about their reasons for seeking elected office and outreach efforts to Muslim Americans, Latinos, and millennials. This is just under 2 hours.
If I can have everybody's attention. We're going to go into our sort of next panel, next discussion. Unfortunately, one of the congressional candidates that we had texted me about 3 a.m., a picture from himself on a plane. He was going to be taking the red eye from California to here to be with us and then taking the flight right away back. Unfortunately, his airplane had mechanical problems. And he was unable to make his connection in Chicago. But we have two of the young Arab American congressional candidates. We are going to have a discussion about political activism. They're going to talk about their campaign. We will then break down to a discussion of political activism, how we're active in your local communities and how we can sort of learn from each other and how to best become active within our own communities and why that's important. To lead our conversation, we have with us Mr. Eddie Ayoub. Eddie?
Am I using this one? Oh, great. That's fine. That's fine. So I want to thank everybody for being here today. As Samar mentioned earlier, this is something that ADC has not done previously, but I think is critically important because as we talk about activism, especially on issues of importance to our community, one of the things that really has been lacking has been an interest in members of our community in running for Congress or political office of any kind, but specifically younger members of our community. And so this year, we have several members, two of which are here, the one that Samar mentioned earlier, and there's also, actually, as far as I know, another candidate in Arizona, and I mean, there might even be a few others from around the country, but we're fortunate enough to have these two very talented and well-known within their respective communities inside Michigan and California, but part of our job today is going to be to get them a little bit better known outside of their community. So what I've asked both of them to do is to introduce themselves at the outset and give you a little sense as to why they decided to run for Congress. There'll be plenty of time for them to talk about why they're better than the other folks in the race, whether at the primary level or if they progress out of the primary, which we hope, to the general. But in the opening comments, if you could just focus on a little bit of your background, let everybody get a better sense of who you are as individuals, and then why you decided to take this plunge, which I would say as someone who has worked in politics for now over 20 years, choosing to run for Congress in particular is not an easy decision. It is not something that is taken lightly, and these two people are going to have to work very hard over the course of the next year and a half. So it's tough. It involves raising money. It involves shoe leather, good old-fashioned politics, going to potluck dinners, talking to people who will scream in your face. You know you'll never get their vote, but you got to sit there and put the smile on your face and deal with them professionally, because that's what being a member of Congress is all about. So having said all that, let's turn it over to both Sam and Fayrouz to give a little bit of background on themselves as individuals, and then let's go a little more into politics after that.
Great. This is okay. It's on. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Fayrouz Saad, as was noted. I am running for Congress in Michigan's 11th Congressional District. And I often tell people that my story started a little over 16 years ago because I was a freshman on 9/11. I was at the University of Michigan. And that day, my parents came and picked me up and took me home because they were afraid of any anti-Muslim or anti-Arab backlash that might occur on campus that day. And honestly, up until that day, I had no idea that this was how Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, or even Arabs and Muslims around the world were regarded. I had no idea that this was a stereotype, specifically of our community here in Michigan, or in America. And so I didn't know what I was going back to for when I returned to campus. But what I went back to is what really had a lasting effect on the rest of my life. Because when I got back to my dorm room that day, my roommates, my friends, new friends for that regard, and some of my neighbors had kind of congregated around my dorm room and together, and they were there to welcome me back, and we all just kind of really reassured one another that there was nothing to be afraid of, that we were in this together, and that no matter what, we would all be safe on campus. And there didn't end up being any problems on campus, thankfully, and we were all okay. But that was so comforting for me because it took me back to what I already knew America was about and what I already believed this country was about. And bringing me here today, that is the America that I see as being threatened, and that is the America that I want to fight for, and that I know other people want us to fight for, and that I know Americans still believe in and want to see elected representatives who believe in an America in which people come together and we work with one another towards common cause. So I'm the daughter of Lebanese immigrants. My parents came to this country over 40 years ago. They settled in Michigan, in the Detroit area, and my dad owns a small meat wholesale business, and I'm a vegetarian. And so I often tell people our house is an example of how everyone can get along, because when a meat man can raise a vegetarian daughter, it says good things about this country. But nevertheless, my parents very much, I think like a lot of us here today and a lot of our parents, came in pursuit of the American dream. And they were able to achieve that American dream. And I know this because I'm the product of that American dream. And I decided to kind of commit my career to public service because of that exactly, because I wanted to make sure that that stays very much alive for everyone and everyone can have access to opportunity in this country. So I'll go really quickly through my resume, but I worked in a campaign in 2004. I went on to work in the Michigan House of Representatives, and then I went on to work for the Obama administration here in DC at the Department of Homeland Security. And I worked on an initiative of the departments and the administrations that included strengthening community policing efforts in communities across the country. And we worked a lot with immigrant communities, Arab American communities, Muslim American communities. And I learned that people, when we went into these communities, people were actually really happy that the government was there and that they wanted to listen to them and they wanted to build that relationship. But I also learned that people also have many challenges that they're facing on a day-to-day level. Everything from wanting to protect the schools that their kids are going to, wanting to ensure that they could put dinner on the table and ensure that they have access to health care. And I realized that, national security and public safety is a bigger thing than just working on community policing strategies and working with your local law enforcement. That's a part of the puzzle, but there's more to it than just that. And so I eventually left the administration. I first went to the Kennedy School, and then most recently, I was working for Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan as his first director of immigrant affairs. And that's where I got to work on a broader set of issues with communities and helping them achieve economic development and economic prosperity within their neighborhoods. And so throughout my career, I've seen how government can work with people and for people to to work towards common goals, to helping people integrate into their communities, helping them make their communities stronger, both through public safety initiatives, through expanding their small businesses, helping them be entrepreneurs, helping them own their homes. And that is what is at the core of government, and that is what I believe government should be doing and our elected representatives should be doing, is that working with the people that they serve to work towards common solutions that help advance them in their everyday lives. And so that is why I decided to run for Congress. A part of why I decided to run for Congress is that I strongly believe that we need better representatives in Congress, and we need people who understand what that relationship looks like between the people that they serve, and that they want to work towards solutions together. I say that I'm a progressive. I absolutely believe in universal health care. I absolutely believe in immigration reform. I believe that we need to fight for affordable child care for women in the workplace, and that all of these things can be achieved if we're working together. So that is what led me, a part of what led me to announce my candidacy. I announced in July. And, you know, in addition to also then seeing that there is a lack of representation at the federal level of our elected officials, and really needing more people that represent the electorate and represent the Arab American community, because until we're there helping make those decisions, Congressman Ellison often says this: if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I think we've seen that again and again. And so now it's time to be at the table.
Thank you all for the opportunity to be here today. Thank you, Sammer, in particular, for this opportunity. And thank you all for all you're doing to help give our community a voice. My name's Sam Jammal, and I'm running for Congress in Orange County. I'm running in the district that I grew up in. It's just out a little north of Disneyland, but a little south of the city of LA. And I'm running because this is the community my parents came to in the 70s. My father came from Jordan, and my mother came from South America, Colombia. They moved here in the 70s with not much in their pockets, but the opportunity and that wish of what's possible in America. When my dad first came to this country, the same day he got off the plane, he went and was pumping gas at a gas station down in LA, was never able to go to college. His story was, you know, the challenge of you come to this country with nothing except for that possibility of how great this country can be. My mom also wasn't able to go to college. They both had working class jobs and helped set the foundation for my siblings and I to have some great opportunities in this community that I'm running in. You know, when they came, it was a different country in a lot of ways. You can work at a fast food restaurant like my dad did and own a home. You had programs in government that can help your kids get student loans and go to college. And so a lot of my American story is that art of what's possible. It's the same reason and the same story as so many of you. And it's our community story, because we're a community of small business owners, lawyers, doctors, engineers. We're a community that contributes to this country on a day-to-day basis. And why I'm running is because we now need to take it to the next level. We need to be in the halls of power. We need to be in Congress. We need to share our story and have our voice. And that's especially important with Donald Trump here. As a Latino and as an Arab American, I had no choice but to get back involved in politics, because I'm not going to be invited to Donald Trump's holiday parties anytime soon. Not a fan of either community, but also our communities aren't at the table as they should be. And so, you know, that's largely why I decided to run. And in terms of my background, my career's been all about civil rights and focused on civil rights. Like Fayrouz, I still remember September 11th and the days after and the months after and the aftermath. I remember walking to class that day and, like every American, just the utter tragedy and fear of what's happening. But I also remember, as an Arab American, the words that would come out of people's mouths, the stories that would be told, and the utter fear in our community. But then as a Latino as well, that's the same fear that I saw growing up in Southern California, because it was never an easy road for the Latino immigrant community either. And so that's why I decided to go to law school, and I went here in Washington, D.C. at the George Washington University Law School to get involved in civil rights and get involved in politics, because somewhat naively, I looked at the history books, and the way communities have a seat at the table in the American story is through civil rights. It's through the work that groups like ADC do, bringing people to the table, adding voices. And so I started my career working at the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, fighting for Latino families and immigrant families during the Bush administration, which in some ways, when it comes to immigration, is the good old days compared to where the Republican Party is now. And so I started there, and from there I wanted to see what the other side of the table was like, and so I worked in the United States Senate as a legislative counsel to a Colorado senator. And I was there on the Senate floor when we passed health care reform, when we passed Wall Street reform, but also when we didn't get the job done on issues like immigration. After working in the Senate, I went and took an appointment in the Obama administration. I was at the Department of Commerce. My job there was to help create jobs and help us export the small businesses' products that we were making across the country. And for me, my highlight of my experience working for President Obama was when my parents came and visited and were able to go to the White House and meet the President of the United States. Coming from nothing and coming with nothing, for them to get to go to an immigrant naturalization ceremony on the 4th of July and shake the president's hand, that was truly a deep honor because it goes back to anything is literally possible in this country. After working for the president, I was a chief of staff in Congress. I worked for Congressman Tony Cardenas from Southern California. At the time, I was the only Arab American chief of staff and one of 6 Latino chiefs of staff. And so I saw just how underrepresented we are as a community, just how little our voices are heard. And for me, it was somewhat full circle because I got involved in civil rights, in my early days in college and then in law school because we needed to make sure our community had a voice at the table. We needed to make sure we have more of those. And so being a chief of staff, I saw firsthand the good, the bad, and the ugly of Congress. I saw what we can do, and I saw what we didn't do, and I saw whose voices weren't at the table. And after doing that for a few years, I decided I wanted to go home to California because having been in Washington for 11 years, it was time to get back to some better weather. And so I moved back to much better weather. I was in Southern California, moved back to the Orange County area, and was working for Solar City and then Tesla trying to build a clean energy economy. And it was a different transition stage because it was still movement building and bringing people to the table, but kind of on a different issue. And so I thought I was actually done with politics because I thought, well, helped add some voices to the process. We elected President Obama, and we're going to have another Democratic president in there. And so, we're safe now. We're starting to get at the table. Like everyone else, November 9th was a shock. It was a shock to the system. And what I saw was not the America my parents immigrated to. It's not the America I grew up in. And so going back at that point as a Latino and as an Arab American, I've decided I have to get back involved. And so I started talking to people locally and figuring out how can I get best involved. And what I saw was it brought me back to when I worked in Congress, and our voices are not at the table. We're in a very difficult time. There's a lot at stake for our community because we don't just have an unfriendly president. We have an attorney general who's been hostile to our community throughout his career. We have a government where if we're not with our voices at the table, we're in real trouble. And so this would arguably be, to me, the most important election in our lifetime. Because this is a matter of who we are as a country. Are we Donald Trump's America? Or are we the America that so many of us immigrated to and so many of our parents immigrated to? That's the fundamental question. And what I've seen in meeting after meeting down in Orange County, people are waiting for our community to step up. They're waiting for our voice to be heard. Because our voice is that same American story. It's what's possible. And if you're fighting for what's possible, if you want America where anything's possible, you've got to fight for it. And so that's where, I'm excited about this panel and this conversation, and hopefully the conversations we can continue to have, because 2018 is the Arab American election. It's the election of whether our community is going to step up after having dirt kicked in our face by the President of the United States. It's the question of whether we're going to tell the story of us being doctors and trying to make sure people have health care while I have a president trying to take it away. It's the story of us being small business owners that are creating jobs and hiring people in communities and not the families that the president's demonizing. And so as a Democrat, we have to step up this election. But as an Arab American, most importantly, this is our election. And so my campaign's about mobilizing our community. I'm running against a 24-year member of Congress who's been hostile from day one. He was an architect of the Iraq War, and on the Foreign Affairs Committee, he consistently votes against the region and votes against having our voice. This is a guy who in 2010, during his primary, spoke outside of a mosque about the ills of multiculturalism. So as women and children were walking into the mosque to pray, their local congressman was speaking about how multiculturalism is bad for America. That's not okay. In any district. That's especially not okay in a district that's 35% Latino, 30% Asian American, 2% African American, and 2% Arab American. We're one of the most diverse districts in the country, but our congressman votes with Donald Trump 97% of the time. And so if we're going to set an example for these guys and saying that we're here to stay and this is our country too, Ed Royce is first in line to get fired. And so I hope you'll join me because this is our chance. My website's sam4congress.com. And I look forward to working with you all and telling our story because that's what this election's about. So much is at risk, and I've been at that table. If we're, like Fayrouz said, if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. But what's worse, if we're not at the table with this president, we really are at risk. And so I urge you all, let's get together and work together and have our voice heard. Thank you.
Sam. So the first thing I want to ask of folks in the audience, is there anybody here who might actually be from Fayrouz's district or Sam's district? So do you know if you're in Orange County, California, or what is it? It's not, it's suburban Detroit.
Suburban Detroit, yeah, Southeast Michigan.
Anyone in the, if you're even remotely close, I mean, I just want to make sure that, you know, you at least know who your potential voter block is.
I'm from San Diego, but maybe I will know some.
Of course, of course.
But I'm sorry. Yeah.
Jammal, he's the one who went back last night.
Okay. So I just wanted to, you know, was curious. My first question, actually, Sam, I only had the pleasure of meeting Fayrouz today, but I've known Sam for a while. He mentioned he worked for a member of Congress. So, Sam, you are unique in the sense of you've heard this term affectionately Arab-tino. You know,
Yeah.
you are an Arab American and a Hispanic American. The Hispanic community, there are a lot of similarities between the Arab community and Hispanic community. Now, obviously, one that we will never be able to replicate are the sheer numbers. I mean, obviously, the clout of the Hispanic community, in large part, is due to the numbers that they have. But it took a while for the Hispanic community to mature in terms of their political activism and their understanding of how they could be involved as a community. It's not to say that the Arab American community and the Muslim community or any of the other, you know, labels. It was interesting, the previous conversation we had prior to this panel. But what are some lessons that you learned as being not only an Hispanic American, but a chief of staff to a Hispanic member of Congress, where you saw the Hispanic community mature in terms of its activism, and what are those lessons that you can share with us so the Arab American community is replicating some of those same tactics?
So I think first and foremost, the community is maturing still. It's not yet mature on the Latino side. And most importantly, it's engagement and it's running people for office. What we did in California after I was very young when Prop 187 happened, but Prop 187 was an effort to basically attack Latino families. It was not too far off from what Donald Trump's trying to do today. And so what we saw there in the aftermath was the largest registration numbers in history for the Latino community throughout Southern California. And over time, more candidates, whether it was city council, state legislature, name your school board, name your position, we were running for office. And what that showed was we're here, and we're here to stay. I think for our community, probably the more historical parallel experience would be the Japanese-American experience in the aftermath of World War II. I studied it a lot as a student because I was trying to see how can I help and be a voice for my communities. And what happened there, and you have good examples with former Congressman Mike Honda and former Congressman Norm Mineta, where the community started electing people to Congress to make sure that never again would the community be marginalized the way it was in the aftermath of an American tragedy. And so it starts with getting our folks up there. But then even more so, it's using the different avenues that we all have to tell our story. In Orange County, what's going on right now with our Arab American caucus is they're having local conversations called Hummus, Not Hate. They're using the love of our community's culture and food to bring in other Democrats into the conversation to learn about us, because unfortunately, we're somewhat of a mystery in the sense of a lot of us are new immigrants. We're here and we have to put our head down and work. My parents never could afford the time to really get involved other than to vote. And a lot of their friends, the same thing, whether you're in a blue collar job or you're owning a business or whatever, you don't have that voting is a luxury, and in some ways, or getting involved politically is a luxury. And I'd say today it's a necessity. The Latino community saw that in the aftermath of some of the anti-immigrant sentiment in the 90s, and the reason why the Congressional Hispanic Caucus is nearly 30 members today is because just waking up one day and saying, this is now our election, this is now our country, we're going to get organized. And we actually as a community have, the Democratic Party, I'll say this, needs us more than we need them in some ways. In Orange County, we have 4 seats open for Congress, or that we have a chance to win because Hillary won them by significant margins. In mine, Hillary Clinton won the seat by 8.6%. There's no path to the Democrats winning Congress without the Arab American community being engaged in Orange County, because we need all 4 seats. I'd imagine yours is the same thing, with our community being a critical part of the vote. And so we have to own it. And I think what the Latino community's done well is they've owned it and they've said, we're here and we're going to make a difference on this. And that's how you evolve and get more political power. It's get engaged, vote, and then support candidates, because it also shows, hey, we're at the table and we're playing this game too.
So just to pick up on that before I turn to Fayrouz with another question, this really is not just on the 2 of them, it's on us as a community. I mean, one of the things that Samara and I have talked about repeatedly is, yes, it is incumbent upon every single person in this room to go out and vote. How you vote is your own personal choice, but you have to vote. But more importantly, because our community is up against it, we have to do more than other people. You can't just go vote. If you have friends and relatives and neighbors who are not registered, get them registered. The same way that you would get on their case about not mowing their lawn or making sure that they're putting their trash where it needs to be, make sure they're registered to vote. Simple as that. I mean, because it sounds corny, but the one day of the year where every single person, no matter how much money you make, no matter where you live, where every single person is equal, is on Election Day. And it's only our own fault when our numbers don't reflect that we're actually voting. So it really is incumbent upon everybody in our community to not only do their part themselves, but to make sure that your friends and your relatives and your neighbors and what have you are voting as well. So Fayrouz, in Michigan, obviously the highest per capita representation of our community, even though ironically California has more Arab Americans as a whole, Michigan, they're more concentrated. But you're not in what is historically dubbed as Little Arabia or Little Lebanon or what have you. So what do you need to do to get our community out and support you, knowing that if you do get elected, you're going to be getting elected by people who are non-Arab or non-Muslim or non-Lebanese or what have you? How are you planning to balance the outreach to our community, but knowing that you're going to need people outside of our community to be successful?
Yeah, so the district, while, yes, it doesn't include Dearborn, most specifically, which is, I think, what we all think of when we think of Michigan and where all the Arabs are. And it is where I grew up. But nevertheless, the district still has about a 10 to 12% Middle Eastern and Asian American community, which does include a high concentration of Muslim Americans as well, and a growing community for that matter. So I'll answer your question, but part of my plan does include engagement and outreach and mobilization of the community. And because, so I'm in an R+3, which essentially means that it's purple, really, it can be flipped. And it is an open seat. The Republican incumbent recently announced that he is not running for re-election. So it just evened the playing field and made this race even more competitive. I scared him away, is what I tell people. But nevertheless, it will take there will take a little bit more than just the Democratic base to win this seat. And so a part of that, I think, a piece of that puzzle, though, is expanding the electorate. And that's why I've always done voter engagement and mobilization within more vulnerable communities like the Arab American and Muslim American community. And in this district, it can go a long, long way. Now, it will take as well to kind of appeal to people outside the community as well. And honestly, I run on a message of there's a common foundation and a common thread that brings us all together. And even though I run as a progressive and I believe in universal health care and I believe in immigration reform and I believe in climate change, there's a common foundation that we all believe in progress. And that could mean anything to kind of working with the communities, getting your message out there so that people understand why universal health care and why having affordable health care and healthcare expansion means progress for all of us and means progress for the community. But then also there's other things, like small businesses are also a kind of a big group in this district. Small business engagement, I believe that we need to do more to expand small businesses, to empower our small business owners, especially mom and pop shops. I won't go into the details of how small businesses are actually categorized, but usually small business means like someone who can gross up to like 3 million or 5 million even, but nevertheless, like really thinking about how can we empower our small businesses. And that's everybody either owns a small business, knows someone who owns a small business, knows someone who's employed by a small business. They're the backbone of our community. And in a place like Michigan, where we've really learned our lesson and understand that we can't rely on one industry to move our economy forward, we really need to be thinking creatively and innovatively about how we really promote a strong economy and how we set up a strong foundation that we can continue to move forward with.
Just to pick up on that for both of you as well. So obviously we have two Democratic candidates here. Our community is just like any other community. We have Democrats, we have Republicans, we have independents. And I'm going to address this question to the audience at some point too, specifically the Republicans who may be in the audience, is how do you tend to appeal or plan to appeal to Republicans in particular, independents, recognizing that both of your districts are more Republican than Democratic? I know Sam mentioned that Hillary Clinton carried the district. I have to admit, I don't know the numbers of your district. Did she carry that district as well, or did Donald Trump carry that district?
Yeah, Donald Trump carried it, but he didn't get the base.
Gotcha. Okay. So, but even more so for you, you are both running in districts that have historically been Republican, and at the presidential level, Republican for you, even though it's Democrat. How, again, are you planning to appeal, especially to maybe Republicans within our community, to say, you know what, I know that you're Republican, I know you may have consistently voted Republican in the past, but we need to have more representation. And I mean, is there, maybe talk a little bit about how you plan on doing that, or is it going to be, you know, because you both have primaries, speaking mostly to a Democratic base? I mean, it's political, so I get it if that's what you have to do, but maybe touch on that a little bit.
Well, I'll start. So it's both, and I've already said an important piece is still working with the immigrant and minority communities in my district and expanding the electorate, who can absolutely make a difference in the primary for me and the general. However, kind of going off of what I said before, there is that common foundation and a common thread in which there's like values we can all agree on that we want to promote, that we want to advance, that we want to, working class families need to find a way in this economy. We need to figure out how to move forward. But also, someone else said it to me best, specifically when talking about our community, because there's Democrats and there's Republicans. And this was someone who he refers himself as a Republican, and he's supporting me. And what he said to me is, he said, he's a doctor, and he said, Fayrouz, I know other Republicans, they've tended to vote with their pocketbooks, but our pocketbooks aren't going to matter if we're getting kicked out of this country, or we're being threatened, or, we don't feel safe here. And that was very powerful and very moving for me, because I'm like, that's absolutely true. Like, there are real problems that we're facing now, and that's why we're in this, and we've flipped our lives upside down, because we really believe that there is so much to fight for, and a part of that is being able to have a voice at the table so we can protect our communities, so we can protect Arab American, Muslim American, Latino American, and other immigrant communities, because we are absolutely at risk with the current administration. And even if we have some sort of hope that maybe it'll flip in 2020, what it's done though is set a tone of what is now acceptable. And so we have to show that it's not acceptable. Because the narrative also matters. And that's the other really important piece to this. Is someone recently said to me, they're a voter in California, and they're like, well, you're just going to vote on things, right? So I don't know, how does that make a difference really for me? And I was just like, because the narrative is important. Because if you don't have people who have that platform to speak off of and who are at the table or are able to speak on your behalf, then you don't have representation, and then there's no one properly informing the narrative.
Yeah, in my district, so Hillary Clinton won the district by 8%, 8.6%. Congressman Royce won by 14. He largely won because we didn't run a candidate against him last time. And when you look at the district numbers, it's 50-50. All the national reports, this is one of those just straight up 50-50. So the question becomes a couple things. One, can you turn out the Democratic voters and keep them on your side? Two, can you bring in the independents and have them a part of your story? And three, on the Republican side, there's a lot of frustration and anger with what's going on. And so can you give them an alternative that they're hiring? Because it's not just a question in politics on firing someone. You may not like Donald Trump. You may not love your congressman, but you're not just going to replace them like that. It's got to be, can you hire someone? And so for me, my conversation focuses on a couple things. Number one, I'm local. I grew up there. My parents' story is the same immigrant story as so many families. Whether it's the Korean American that came here, the Latino, or someone who came several generations over, these are working families just trying to get ahead for the next generation. And number two, I can do the job on day one. I was a chief of staff in Congress and a senior official in the Obama administration. I know how government works. And for our community in particular, having someone up there who can get stuff done and know how it works, I can make sure we have a voice at the table and can make sure that we are, moving our conversation forward and our story forward. And then number three, I think when you tie, and Fayrouz mentioned this, you got to bring it back into the aspiration of who we are as Americans. This is a question of whether or not we're Donald Trump's America or whether the America that we all know and believe in. And so I think most people get that. And so you have to talk about it, one, that's who we are, but two, also get back to some of the issues that really unites us. People want to make sure that they're safe. They want to make sure that they're making enough at work so they can pay their bills. And they want to make sure that their kids can get ahead. That's what this country's always been about. And so we can get back. For me, I go around and talk to folks, let's get back to the basics. Let's talk about that American dream and the economy. It's slipping away from everyone, and everyone's frustrated. But Donald Trump's not the solution for that frustration. And I think whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or independent, there is that consensus. This guy's not the solution for that. But our jobs as candidates is to show we actually have solutions. And it's about talking about, some of our roads in Fullerton, the city that I live in, the district, we have some of the worst roads in Southern California. Across in Walnut, another city in the district, people are being priced out of their homes at rates that we've never seen. The average income in the district is $81,000, but to buy a home now in Orange County, you have to make $174,000. So the next generation can't live where they grew up. And that cuts across parties because it is that aspiration of who we are as a country and what we're about. And so when I talk to Republicans, it's the same thing of, I can do the job, and I can also talk about some of the things that we want to do in terms of job creation, but two, let's get our community back, and let's make sure the next generation can have the American dream that was set up for us.
Great. So would like to open it up to a few questions here. Sir, we're going to get you a microphone here. Oh, this one? Are we going to use this one?
They only give us two.
My name is Ratib Rabi. I'm with the Holy Land Christian Ecumenical Foundation. And as we can hear my accent, that means I'm first generation American. And what you said is beautiful. We are against Trump and Republican and against him too. And you are Democrats. I love Democrats, but not Hillary Clinton. All of that, we can talk about it, okay? But my interest is, what is your agenda about Palestine, Syria? You didn't say that. We talked about politics, we talked about climates, we talked about all of that stuff. I want to hear your views on what you are going to do for us as back home, because we work on human rights issues and we need the Congress support. Thank you.
So I'll go first. My opponent, Ed Royce, is the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He's not helpful to our community at all. He's not very helpful in general to anyone. He's just there. And so in one sense, with someone like Ed Royce, he needs to be held accountable for pushing positions that are much more divisive in the region and not trying to solve problems and just trying to attack, and not really thinking through foreign affairs and some of the challenges. As I mentioned before, he was one of the architects of the Iraq War. And he was doing that without any thought of the consequence. And what we've seen in the region is things are getting harder and harder and more difficult. And so, when I look at, number one, when I'm talking to people in the district about the issue, because if we're talking about foreign affairs, they're asking, well, he's the House Foreign Affairs Committee chair. And so my response back is, well, what's he done for us lately? Since Donald Trump's been president, he said next to nothing on foreign affairs. He held hearing after hearing on Benghazi. He was pushing and attacking President Obama on his efforts at diplomacy in Iran. And but he's mentioned nothing about some of the ballistic behavior coming out of the White House. And so when it comes to the region, how I look at it, we're going to have our voice there so we can be at the table. And it does go back to telling our story and reminding people that a lot of us are first generation and do care and have ties into the region. And so, whether it's Palestine and advocating for a two-state solution, or whether it's Syria and making sure that every voice is heard and we're trying to find solutions to some of the challenges there, or just, making sure that there's a voice in Congress its first instinct isn't let's go to war in the region. It's let's work with the international community and let's find some solutions that are actually long-term, because what's happened is Washington to some extent has been trigger happy on a lot of this stuff without thinking through the consequences in the refugee situation. When I was in Jordan in 2007, after I went and visited my family, what we saw there was, the country's changed because of a lot of Iraqi refugees. And now I talk to family that's still there. Now there's a lot of Syrian refugees. You're changing the nature of a lot of these communities and countries because we're having a very short-sighted foreign affairs from the American perspective. We have to think through these things more. And I think what really has to happen is putting a new next generation of leadership in there, because a lot of times the conversations here when it comes to foreign affairs get stale and we're not thinking through solutions. We can't have another generation grow up with a clenched fist. Whether it's when you're talking about Israel and Palestine, we can't have another generation lost to just being angry at each other. That's not the path forward. When it comes to the rest of the Middle East, it's the same thing. We really do have to turn the page because the challenges are only going to get greater as we start to enter climate change and things like that.
So when I said if we're not at the table, we're on the menu, I think we've seen that. And we've seen that in a lot of policies, and foreign policy is certainly one of them. When I look at what's happening and what's happened in the Middle East, I see that there has been a lack of representation of people who understand the area, who understand the culture and understand the people who are helping make the decisions. And that is, not to sound repetitive, but that is absolutely why we need more people from our community at the table, because we can have that voice. And if we don't fully understand, then we're representatives of you all and know exactly where to go back to find answers, to go back to organizations like ADC, AAI, a number of the others that where there's policy experts and there's people who understand the issues. And that is what's missing right now. And I think that you can probably ask almost any staff person of ADC in this room is what's that direct line that they have into Congress or into administration officials. It's probably not very strong. And so when you have people from the community who are now serving in those positions, you have that direct line of communication to be able to influence that policy, to be able to fight for it, to be able to argue that diplomacy is the answer and not war, to be able to make others understand how we can actually get to a two-state solution. And, I don't even know what the answer is in Syria anymore, but I will say that I believe it's gotten to this point because we weren't at the table, because you didn't have people making informed decisions and really understanding the dynamics in Syria on the ground and what was happening. So I just, the answer isn't, though, to give up or to say it's never going to change, because I think that it's gotten to this point because we haven't had that active of a position at the table, and we haven't had those strong lines of communication.
So I'm just going to interject a little bit myself as well, because I thought something that you said, Fayrouz, that really struck me. So a few years older than both of you. I'd like to think not too much older, but a few years older. I never really worried or thought about my community in terms of being disenfranchised really until 9/11 as well. I mean, having worked in politics before 9/11, I did see it all the time. It was a little bit before 9/11 in terms of when I came to the Hill, if you were too outspoken as an Arab American, you ran the risk of not being able to get certain jobs in the State Department or in certain places within government. But it was really 9/11 that brought all that home. But what I would like to emphasize to everybody, whether your primary issues are foreign or domestic, see, for me, not that I don't care about Israel, Palestine, not that I don't care about Lebanon or Syria, those are all critically important issues to me. But Sammer's heard me say this before, and anytime I've been on a panel at AAI or anyone else, my grandparents came here in 1889. So I identify much more as the American side of my background than I do as the Arab side. It's just a reality. I mean, it's not that I'm not proud of my Arab American heritage, but what I mean when I say that is, to me, it's civil liberties, and to me, it's how we're treated as Arab Americans that has really been the core of why I've chosen to get more active in the community. And I know you've heard both Sam and Fayrouz say this a lot, but having a seat at the table really makes a difference. And I'm just going to point to something that's very specific that's happened in the course of last year. Obviously, this Russia investigation has gotten a lot of political news, play, what have you. If you recall, one of the points during the investigation when you were talking about the unmasking, if that rings any bells to anybody in terms of when wiretap communications, they might be wiretapping somebody based on a FISA warrant from overseas or what have you, and then you unmask the people with whom that particular foreign contact was speaking, and Michael Flynn, the former national security advisor, got caught up in that. All of a sudden there was this outcry about unmasking because somebody that was a political ally of certain people in Congress was unmasked. When that happens to our community all the time, but there was nobody, literally nobody at the table right after 9/11 talking about how these kind of things were going to affect our community. So our community gets unmasked all the time and nobody says a word about it. And so that affects the ability for people in our community to get jobs, to get housing, to be cleared for, postgraduate, I mean, all these kind of things that you may not think about. So I just raise that to say that if you don't hear our candidates talking 24/7 about Israel, Palestine, or about Syria, or about Iraq, or Iran, or the split between the Qataris and the Emiratis and the Saudis, it doesn't mean that they don't care about those issues. This is personal opinion, of course, but I think someone from our community is going to be better suited to deal with any of those issues, whether it's Israel, Palestine, or whatever, just because they're a member of our community. I may wholeheartedly disagree on Sam's position on Israel, Palestine, or your position on Jordan, or I don't know what they are. I mean, I think that's what the gentleman was asking, is he'd like to know a little bit more about those positions. But I think just a little for me to inject to say that just having us at the table really is part of what we're trying to accomplish here. So I mean, forgive the interjection there, but it's something that I saw firsthand because I was in Congress, I was working for a member of Congress, excuse me, when the Patriot Act was asked and it was passed, and it was like preaching to a brick wall. Nobody wanted to listen to what I was saying, and now all of the things that are happening that we're seeing, anyway, have said that. Please.
We have a speaker.
Oh, sorry. First of all, I'm sorry, Edward, but Palestine is a domestic issue. When we give $3 billion a year, and when pro-Israel groups actually pro-Israel groups employ Islamophobic techniques against Americans in their lobbying. So it's not a foreign policy issue. It's
that portion of it's not a foreign policy.
No, we give $3 billion a year, so it is a domestic issue. But in any case, and it might be a misunderstanding of the Arab American community to think that we separate those things in our mind. We don't. War with Syria is a domestic issue, but I don't think there's a time or place probably to ask Fayrouz and Sam, maybe make it a litmus test, although I would hope that they would vote against, although I hope they would vote against fund. But there's nothing wrong with our community asking candidates, especially candidates from our community, to say, if we help you get elected, we expect you to vote against funding for Israel. And if we help you get elected, well, that's the one thing we all agree on. So I won't get into other issues. You know, who cares about what the Wahhabi Game of Thrones is doing in Qatar and Saudi Arabia? But let me say what ADC can't say, and what Sam and Fayrouz have alluded to a little bit. But everybody in this room, please give them money. FayrouzSaad.com, SamForCongress.com. Go give them money. I gave money today. Go to their websites. Give them money. They need to win. They have fundraising goals they have to reach. We do need to get them into Congress. It's wildly, wildly important. And I can speak for Fayrouz because I've known her for a very long time. She will be a jewel of our community in Congress. She is very important for us to have in there. Give her money. Give Sam money too. I'm sure he's a great guy. And let's make sure we get them in Congress.
Hi. My question is to Fayrouz, and I'm sorry, I'm not sure if you're Muslim, so I don't know if to direct this question to you or not, because it's about Islamophobia. Anyway, like, there's so much, there's a really pernicious campaign to demonize Muslims and delegitimize us as this fifth column, and there's this narrative that Muslims are trying to impose Sharia in the U.S. And there are groups that are very, very active, like Act for America and Center for Security Policy in this town. And I mean, any Muslim who stands up risks being attacked. You know, you could there will probably be a narrative that you are going to go there to undermine the Constitution. You know, Homa Abedin, Hillary's aide, is affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm just wondering if you've confronted that, and have you thought about that, and how would you react to that? Like, do you worry that that might influence enough people and create like a real, you know, hate storm around your campaign?
So within 24 hours of my announcement, the Twitter and social media trolls were out, and they've still been out. And I've had all sorts of those accusations come my way, everything from I'm going to promote Sharia law to I'm going to bring foreigners here. One tweet said something like, Fayrouz promotes open borders and free stuff. And I'm like, who doesn't like free stuff? Why is that a bad thing? I don't. So, like, I mean, this was an actual tweet. So, and that got retweeted and retweeted. So, yeah, it's come at me already, and I expect that it'll continue to come at me, unfortunately. I mean, really, for me, it's white noise at this point, because I already knew it existed. This is part of why I'm sitting here today. This is part of why I'm running for Congress, because, again, I believe that narrative is so important. And it's something like 62% of Americans say they've never met a Muslim or don't know a Muslim. And then I often compare that to how there's, I believe it's 6% of domestic terrorist acts have been committed by a Muslim, right? So 94% have not. And yet it often seems like the policies and legislation that are directed towards countering domestic terrorism are focused on our community. And it often seems like hate and fear-mongering around this narrative is constantly geared towards our community, right? So that's the disparity, that people just don't understand Muslims. They don't know who we are, what we believe in, what our values are. And some people might not ever want to know, but that doesn't mean we're not going to still try and tell them, and we're not going to speak out for it. And I've been a part of activist groups and organizations, and starting some in Michigan locally, to actually fight back against anti-Sharia law legislation in different states across the country. Because, another very important piece to this is, yes, we need to run for office and have a seat at the table, but and that's where groups like ADC and others, why they're so important, because we need to have have that ground game as well. Like, you all need to get active in your communities. You need to find a local organization that's working towards pushing back against this, and everything from voting and ensuring you hold any member who introduces or passes or votes for that type of legislation, you hold them accountable by either their vote, or you call their office and you visit them and you ask them why. Like, we need to stay on top of them because we need to hold people accountable.
I'll just quickly comment. My father's Greek Orthodox, so my background isn't Muslim. But what I do know from my experience working in politics, the Muslim community hasn't been at the table for the most part. And so what happens is it's a mystery, not just to the broader American public, but also to elected officials. When I was a chief of staff, I was a chief of staff for a freshman member of Congress. And I kind of wanted to get this point in my other comments that our community's got to be the first one in the room talking to these new elected officials and telling their story. Whether it's on foreign affairs, we're never there. I was working for the congressman when we were, as his chief, when we were deciding whether to do the red line vote on Syria that Obama had set forth. There was no Arab American advocacy community that walked in my door when I was a chief of staff. And I know from other members of Congress is they're not hearing from their local Muslim community. They're not being invited to the mosque to speak and get to know folks. And that's on us. You know, that's on all of us if we're not telling that story and being engaged. Because if people don't know and people aren't hearing about it, there's just so many different things that come your way, whether you're a candidate or an elected official, that it's really hard to get down to the specifics at times. And so it is incumbent for us to be there. You know, after the election, the first thing that should be done in every community is invite whomever's elected, even if you voted against them, to visit the local mosque. Give them a tour. Let them meet the young kids there that are changing the community, and they're a part of that community. And with candidates, invite them to go speak at the at the mosque or any community events. One of my first events as a candidate was speaking at a Sikh temple in the district. No candidate for Congress in the area had ever spoken at that temple. And I'm going to keep going to different community centers and mosques and churches and having a conversation, because that's the only way to get people to feel like, hey, we want to represent everyone in the district. But it's got to be a two-way street, because I was invited to. And so I think with candidates, invite them. That's how it changes, and that's how you change some of the narrative, because it is only a small percentage of Americans that have that hate and anger in them, and a lot of it's based on misinformation. But if we're not putting our voices out there back, that becomes the only voice, not just the loudest voice.
Hi. Two things that are related, I think. One is you're quite right in saying, and you all talk about telling our story, which I think is really important. I just finished writing a memoir trying to tell my story. In a way, trying to influence, but that's besides the point. I think we need to educate, and this is what I'm hearing from a lot of you. We need to educate the American public, because there's so much counter information, misinformation, very well funded, actually, especially Islamophobia, as you all know. But it brings me to something more of socially related about our community, and maybe you've seen that too. But I'm wondering how much, two things. One is our community who immigrate come from countries. No, but it brings me to something more of socially related about our community, and maybe you've seen that too. But I'm wondering how much, two things. One is our community who immigrate come from countries where they don't really trust the government. The government hasn't done anything for them. They feel powerless in terms of an individual making any change. And so they come here and, you know, they do their best to make a living, get their children a better future. But then what I hear from people in my community is they want their children to be doctors and lawyers, and that's it. And what would it take for them to help them understand that, to trust that if your kid becomes involved in politics, that's going to help the whole community. So it's actually changing the mindset of our own community and taking responsibility for that, you know, as much as trying to educate the American public. and to show up also. I think what I see, especially in this atmosphere of hate and fear-mongering and vilification and demonization, and especially I think the Muslim community is retreating because they're afraid. And so how do you address that fear?
I'll start. So growing up, my dad had one piece of advice when it came to politics: don't fight City Hall. And that's the lesson he had learned from the region. You don't fight City Hall. And my response was, yeah, you don't fight City Hall, you change it. And so I think a lot of it, though, is we have to actually get in the community and educate people on what they can do, because the Latino community has a lot of those same distrust issues. You know, you come from a country and it's not very politically engaged, or the government doesn't work. So you come here, and why are you going to get engaged? Because it doesn't always seem like it's going to work. But that's not actually the case here. Like, you know, we have two candidates that are running for Congress from our community. We've had many other candidates over the years run, and some elected officials. And sometimes, like, I think ADC and AAI do great jobs in telling our community's story. But we've got to always remind people our community actually has shown the ability to get engaged. But the challenge is we've got to make sure we keep getting more people involved. And kind of alluding to what that gentleman said earlier, it is that same dynamic of, let's, you know, support the candidates to get them in there and introduce the candidates to the community. I mean, you know, I think for both of us, I assume on Fayrouz, I don't put words in her mouth, but some of, in terms of building out these campaigns, because they are expensive and hard, is you're having to go everywhere to talk to the Arab American and Muslim community, to tell your story and, you know, almost in a sense nationalize the conversation, because we're spread out everywhere. And so hopefully if there's anything that comes out of this, it's, hey, one of us can run, you know? And I think the more we can tell that, hopefully next election we get some more people to come in, and then the one after that. And that's how it changes. But I think the skepticism's there, but you just got to remind people. I mean, an immigrant is a hopeful person. You don't move across the world to go move somewhere and start a new life if you don't have some hope. It just doesn't happen. You know, you're not a natural cynic. And so a lot of times you come in with a built-in cynicism towards politics. And you got to remind people, as hard as it can be, and it seems in politics, as hard as it can be to move across the world, you can actually build something more, and especially build towards the future. And so I think we have to remind people of that aspect. And we do have enough examples, and we've got to keep creating more examples on that.
So here's what you can do. You can open up your home, invite your friends and families who are Arab American or are Muslim or Latino and who you believe have this maybe attitude or thought process. Invite them into your homes and invite a candidate to come speak to them, or an organization and voter mobilization to come speak to them. And it's sometimes that simple. Like, really, that is how everyone in this room can help make a difference and work towards that change, is by just starting with yourself in your own home. I mean, I often say I'm a community organizer by trade, because like that's how I started my career, as a community organizer. And it was like a little bit before Obama made it cool. So it was like, for me, like that I truly, truly believe in community organizing. And sometimes it starts at those simplest levels. And so I've been involved in a number of organizations and grassroots and activism levels to help kind of do that education and that engagement and that mobilization. And it's hard, and it does take a lot of work, but we just have to keep doing it, and we have to keep pushing. And it strengthens organizations like ADC and others that are trying to bring us together at a national level, but we need the work on the ground at home as well.
Well, and just to pick up on that, you know, talk about the maturation of the Hispanic community, for example, and its effect on politics. Maybe on this point, with respect to what both of you commented on, a lot of people have never met a Muslim, or at least they say they don't know that they've ever met a Muslim or what have you. It's very similar to the gay community, and the very quick transition you saw from this country going from majority of the population being anti-gay marriage to, in a very rapid period of time, I would say within 10 years, which when you're talking about social change like that, that is a very, I mean, California, who was supposed to be the progressive leader, you know, voted to impose restrictions on same-sex marriage, and then within a matter of 10 years. Why? Because more and more people realized that they had gay friends and gay neighbors, and their kids would come home with a friend from school who was openly gay. I mention that to say it's very similar in our community as well, in the sense of go to some of those community events and in whatever way that you feel most comfortable, talk about the community. If you have a concern about civil liberties, raise it. If you have a concern about Israel-Palestine, raise it. If you have a concern about whatever, something that just shows that, oh, the same person that is talking about those Arab and Muslim issues is also the doctor that I go to that afternoon, or my dentist, or the teacher. In other words, we are no different from anybody else. I mean, that is really what changed the dynamic with respect to the gay community, was that everybody realized that, oh, they weren't these pariahs or these different people. They were the same as everybody else. And that's immediately, in my opinion, how the politics around gay marriage, for example, changed. And I think it's going to be very similar. Right now, the political discourse at the national level on our community is not positive. One of the things that we are going to have to change, and again, it's incumbent upon us. If you look at any ethnic group or religious group, when a member of Congress or a celebrity or something says something disparaging about African Americans or Hispanics or gays or whomever, they immediately get vilified by 100 different organizations and their poll numbers dip or whatever. You vilify our community and your poll numbers spike in certain parts of the country. We've seen that happen. You know, those are the kind of things that we have to do better at changing, and that's where it does start, as Fayrouz and Sam have said, on the ground. And quite frankly, that's us. That's on us. We can blame everybody else, but it's really on us to be more proactive and calling people out and showing up at these kind of things on a regular basis, and then getting our friends and colleagues to do the same. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Please.
Actually, you just said what I was going to say, but I'll try to say it briefly. I'm 100% WASP, but I speak Arabic and have an Arab wife with Muslim relatives. But my point is, you Arabs and Muslims need to come out of the closet. It's a huge 62% of people have no idea. They've never met a Muslim. And so the point is, you may know some guy, Mo, and you've been bowling with him for 10 years, and you're utterly clueless that he's Muslim. And that causes cognitive dissonance, because Muslims are supposed to be bad, but Mo, he's my bowling partner. Now what do I do? So my point is, go beyond politics. Every person in this room, or every Arab and Muslim in the United States, should get out of the closet, come out, and cause cognitive dissonance. That's the way to change things. Thanks.
Hi, I work for a magazine called the Washington Report on Middle East Affairs, and we have congressional scoreboards. We're keeping track of how people vote. But we've always been very tormented, conflicted, whatever, when we talk about Arab Americans running for office, because will we put a bullseye on you for AIPAC? So we're always afraid to help you, try to help you. What can we do to help?
I unfortunately, I don't know the exact dynamics that you just mentioned there, so I don't have an exact answer, to be completely honest. But I mean, everyone in this room can help somehow. And whether that is through a direct contribution, or whether that is through connections and networks, or whether that is through kind of just opening up your Rolodex or whatever to us, to be able to build those relationships so that we can push back against any negativity that might come our way from any group, whomever that they might be. And that's, a big piece of what we're doing right now. Yes, it's fundraising, and it sucks. But I tell people also, it's true. I'm like building a network as well, because what what I know is possible is that that our community has the strength and the power and the resources to support us as candidates and to make sure that we're successful, but we don't have the reach on our own. And there's not enough of us who are engaged in the process. And so helping bring people into that process would also be incredibly helpful, I think, for the both of us. And you could tell me if I'm wrong, but I know that the community can make a huge difference for us, and the reach that's what's limited.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar in some of the dynamics there as well, but what I do know is this. America's great when every voice is at the table, when everyone's a part of the conversation. That doesn't always happen. And going back to the thing earlier, that's incumbent on us and our community to be at the table and tell our story. And, I think as a chief of staff, I would take meetings with everyone and have a conversation and kind of go back and forth. Let's figure this out. Let's find solutions. I do think when it comes to the region, we're going to have to turn the page and have to have a solutions-oriented conversation, because we cannot lose another generation to just being divided and hating each other. We can't. And no matter where you stand on the issue, no matter how hawkish you are or one direction or another, everyone agrees with that. We cannot do that. But we've got to turn the page. And the way we do that is by bringing in new voices into the process and adding more people to the table. Again, America's great when we're functionally a dinner table where everyone's arguing where they stand on an issue and arguing what's best for the country and what's best for the world. And right now, our community's not at that dinner table arguing. We're outside. And so kind of what Fayrouz is saying for us as candidates is, we're going to draw attention, obviously, given our background and our story and given who's president and given some of those challenges. And so I think what you're functionally saying is help us, get out there and talk to folks and help get our backs on this, because this does go back into don't fight City Hall. You don't fight City Hall if you're storming the mountain, if you're storming City Hall by yourself. You don't want to do that. And so if you can help us and get our backs on that, it adds that voice and it kind of makes sure that every conversation's there.
Just to address your specific question, I think when Fayrouz mentioned about the kind of hate that she saw when she announced her candidacy, that's going to happen. I mean, that is the political reality of an Arab American or a Muslim American running for public office or taking on any high-profile position. That's going to happen, and it may not be AIPAC. It may just be people who just, there are people in this country as part of the political process who do not want Arabs and Muslims to be legitimized as being, upstanding members of the community. That's their whole MO, because if you dehumanize us as a community, it makes it a lot easier for members of every other community to not identify with us as Americans, as individuals, what have you. So what I would say is that's going to happen anyway. So raising the profile of these two and other individuals that shows how just like everybody else they are and their stories. I mean, someone mentioned about telling their stories. I remember when we were fighting a couple of years ago the issue of adding Israel to the list of visa waiver. One of the things that made that an effective argument was we told stories. It wasn't just numbers of how many Palestinians or Arab Americans or what have you who were being turned away at the border or being forced to wait for 5, 6, 9, 11, however many hours. It was telling that individual story to members of Congress and turning it into something that people could identify with. And so to go to your specific question, the hate's going to come regardless. But I think it's, in my opinion, it's better to have those kind of human interest pieces that where people can identify with Fayrouz as a person and as Sam as a person, or as a Michigander or a Californian, Orange County, the OC, whatever, something that brings it home to them that they're not these dehumanizing factors. They're good old-fashioned Americans running to represent their constituents and neighbors in Congress. Do we have others, or is that it?
Yes, a quick comment. Both candidates discussed this idea of increasing or having more Arab voices at the table. However, we have several members of Congress who are, in fact, Arab American. So with that said, have both candidates reached out to those members of Congress? Have they agreed to support, you guys moving forward? Because in some instances, there have been several members of Congress, both Arab American or our allies who are African American or Hispanic, have been very vocal in supporting our issues, while others have remained silent. So even with more Arabs at the table, if certain voices continue to remain silent, what do we do from there?
Right, and that's actually good. Let me make a comment on this as well, because I think you both have contested primaries. So you may want to comment on that as well, because my recollection, please, Yana, correct me if I'm wrong, since we have two Democratic candidates here, I think there's two Democratic American members of Congress, so Ruben Kihuen of Nevada and Charlie Crist of Florida. Are there any other Democrats that I'm missing?
No, the rest are Republican.
So I know, with Ruben, there's a particular dynamic that, Sam, I think you can speak to because it's your primary.
Yeah, so I think we're both in the very early stages on this, and so some of it, we're functionally still building this out. In terms of outreach to a lot of the members, you have those conversations, but also there's a lot of pressure to stay out of the primaries right now, because I know in my field we have 4 different people running, and yeah, we have a Latino. He's from outside the district and won the lottery, and we.
When he says won the lottery, he didn't win a scratch off. He won $200 million.
Yeah, so he's not from the community and knows the community, but he's still running. And then we have another self-funder, and then a couple other folks. And so, there is a degree of, well, let me step back and see how this goes. And that's kind of where building out our campaigns early and showing that broad support then makes it easier for some of those members, because, there is a degree of when do you step in and support someone. In terms of, I think, making sure that people, when they're there, have a voice at the table, we are both self-identifying as Arab Americans running for Congress. That doesn't always happen. And so, just that fact that we both see the need for that voice is a little bit of a different narrative than traditionally the case. And then one of the other Arab Americans running or in Congress right now actually is in Orange County as well. I don't think he'll be taking my call because he's Darrell Issa and he's running against a ton of Democrats. And so, so when it comes, but as this process moves forward, there are those conversations that we're going to have with a lot of these members. And really it's showing, is your campaign for real and can you win? And I think we're both trying to show that our campaigns are for real and we can win, and that changes that conversation in Washington in general.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yes, because we both have contested primaries. For the most part, party leaders or people who represent the party in any way are kind of just taking that step back, and that is why, for me, this is my first quarter. I don't know if it's yours, and so that September 30th deadline of ours is incredibly important because it does become the mark of our legitimacy for our race, and why it's so important, and why I know I'm not sleeping, and I'm guessing you're not either, because it's a million miles a minute to get to this first deadline, and it is incredibly important. And unfortunately, it is the necessary evil in this race. And I will say this is yes, we'll eventually reach out and we'll do that. And if I believe, from what I know, I'm the only Arab American Muslim woman running at this level. And I would be the first Arab American Muslim woman in Congress ever. But it's not just about, and I think Sam was alluding to this, but I don't want to, the first Muslim woman, yeah. So I think Sam was alluding to this. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's not just about where someone's grandparents or parents are from and they have an Arab-sounding last name, but look at their track record, from even before Congress. It's so easy to show up in our communities and say I'm Arab American when they want to ask for money, but what have they done to show that they're going to fight for our communities and that they're going to stand beside us? And what are they saying they're going to do as well? And let's also remember that. And so we're both here because we see a gap, and we see that there's still a voice that needs to be heard at that level. And because we both have fought for certain rights of our communities and fought to strengthen our communities, because we believe that there needs to still be more of that representation in Congress.
Sure. Okay, we have about 10 or 15 minutes left in this program. So I want to sort of take the focus off and put the focus on you. You have three people here. They're not new to the game. These are three very experienced organizers and political activists. So I want, and we have people in the audiences that are from all over the country. We have Texas represented, we have Florida, we have New York, we have people from all over. So I want to hear from you guys, what is happening politically in your local areas? Because remember, all politics is local. So what's happening in your locations, and see if maybe they can help you, give you some advice as to what's happening, how you can better tackle that issue, or how maybe you become more effective in those issues. So let's, does anybody want to start about, go ahead.
Give me a microphone.
Closer.
Yeah, I'm Susan, and this is Ahmed, my husband, and we're from Texas. And ADC has been very active in the past year. A couple of things that we've done is that we had a deputy voter registration seminar. And what you do is you just go to your county clerk and ask to be deputized so that you can register voters. So we got 7 people from our group to go and do that. So that's been one good thing. Very grassroots, very local. We've also joined, well, of course, Austin is very politically active on the Democratic side, despite our horrendous legislature and governor and attorney general. But we have made a lot of alliances in the community. And locally, there are small groups that get together monthly. And all the indivisible organizations for all the counties are very well organized. We come from a very small town outside of Austin called Dripping Springs, and they have a Democratic alliance of people in Hayes County and Blanco County. I mean, so they're all local, and it's very gratifying to see that there is some more awareness being raised at those local levels about issues. Especially our issues. So, did you want to say anything about that?
Yeah. My name is Ahmed. I mean, we do live in near Dripping Springs, but we're in Austin. So we've been very active within the community. The Muslim community also we've helped them a lot to get activated. We have in Texas about, I don't know how many Arabs, I'm guessing, considering how many people you see, but we've been very active because the Texas legislature, thank God, they meet once every 2 years. So they met this year, so we had a Muslim legislative day, so we had over 200 Muslims go there, and we had about 2,000 people came to protect the Muslims who went to go into the legislature because last year they were attacked. The Muslims that were there. But also now we have people engaged in the process. So we work very closely with the Latino community. Texas is about 50% Latino. They are not terribly represented in the government, but we work very closely with them. And we're trying to get the Muslim community and the Arab community engaged in the electoral process. So people are working with our revolution in terms of organizing and electing representatives. We also have people working with the Democratic Party, I should say, in San Antonio and in Austin. And actually, tomorrow there is a fundraiser for Beto O'Rourke in Austin. The Muslim community is putting that. So we've been very active with, people who are running for Congress and also supporting people who are running against Roger Williams, or is it William Rogers? It's, whatever his name is our representative. He's one of those terrible guys. But so we're pretty active in terms of when it comes to that, but we're working very, very closely with the Latino community. I think they have better chance of actually getting people elected in Texas than Arabs and Muslims. Arabs and Muslims are not there yet because of all the things that you've said, but I'm going to say something that my wife has asked me not to say, but we had a meeting, so that should make everybody here feel good about not being recognized or not being I mean, nobody had met a Muslim or something. We were having a meeting for the Dripping Springs Democratic Party in a Mexican-American restaurant called Flores, which is run by a Latino family. All the workers there are from the family, from the Flores family. And you can tell they're Latinos. So in the discussion for the Democratic Party, they were talking about you should work with the minorities and so forth. And one lady stood up and said, where can we find minorities? Everybody. So don't feel bad if somebody doesn't notice Arabs or Muslims. It works for everybody. Anyways, thanks for being so.
Well, a comment that I would like to make about especially members of our community who live in predominantly conservative or Republican districts who you may not think are going to be supportive, and they probably aren't. But what I would suggest is find some things in our community that resonate with some of the issues in the conservative community or the Republican community. For example, and they may look at it and say, all right, that doesn't apply or that's different. But you look at some of the things like in Texas, I'm from Nevada. So, I mean, the NRA is huge in Nevada. So gun ownership and Second Amendment rights or whatever. Okay, so if they don't want to hear about whatever issue is the most important to you, again, whether it's a domestic or foreign policy issue, put it in terms that they may be able to relate to with respect to their most important issues. So like, for example, like gun ownership, Second Amendment rights. Okay, so talk about First Amendment rights and religious freedom or civil liberties or what have you. Say, look, we agree with you that there is some concern about an attack on the Constitution of the United States. The same zeal that you have for the Second Amendment, we have for the First Amendment or the Fourth Amendment or some of the things that adversely affect our community. Or put it in terms, now they may be hypocritical and say, oh, that doesn't apply here or what have you. But when I'm talking to members of Congress who at first or never agree on a position that I'm trying to espouse on behalf of the community, I try to say like we talk about BDS, for example. Less so about the effect of BDS in the region, more so about the ability of Americans to engage in boycotts without being criminalized or what have you. That's the power of the government dictating what you can or cannot do. That's language that they understand with respect to gun ownership. They don't want the government telling them how many guns they can own. So, I mean, I'm just giving you one example. It does require being a little creative. It may not work, but it's the kind of thing where at the very least, I want them going home after they've met with you saying, I wonder if they had a point. You know, they may not, but I wonder if they had a point when you raise some of these issues that they may never have thought to equate 2 + 2 = 4.
So thank you for that. So I appreciate it. And we do that. We do work on multiple levels. First, on the local level, the city government in Austin. I mean, we are the only, they call it in Texas, the blue dot in Texas, right? Austin, right?
But I'm talking about outside of Austin.
I'm saying just, so we have a very friendly relationship with the city government. Basically, when we need something from them, we get 10 votes for, 1 vote against. The same person votes against us. So we have a friendly relationship. We have good relationship with the mayor and so forth. In the legislative body in Texas as well, we have several people that we talk to, and they support us, and they sponsor activities that we have there. Just to give you an idea about the complexion and how these people think. The Texas legislators are not the reasonable people that you would expect to be in Congress. Let me be very clear. I'll give you the example of SB 4, which is the anti-sanctuary cities legislative. They hold hearings, right? Everybody here knows about hearings. They held hearings on that. This is true numbers. They said we will listen to everybody who registers to speak. They had 600 people registered. They stayed listening to them until 3 a.m. in the morning. 594 people spoke against the legislators. 6% for it. That is 99 against, 1 for. They voted 7 for, 2 against. They don't care about what we say. This is a reality in Texas. We talk to these people. We talk to their representative, but there is a level of. I mean, you talk about Trump. This is the Trump government multiplied by power 10 in Texas. That's who they are. So we work with them as much as we can, But the only way to deal with these people is to absolutely positively replace them. And we're looking for people to run for their districts and replace them. They don't care. That's the bottom line. They don't care. They're not reasonable people.
All I would say, just to wrap that, and I share, welcome your comments as well, is if they don't care, then you have to get the people who vote for them to care. I mean, it's one or the other, because it can't be either or. I mean, it has to be either or. It can't be both or neither. And so if they won't listen to you, then you have to get the people that vote for them to listen to you.
One thing to broaden that out a little bit, because you look at the national level, we have a lot of people who don't care as well. And that's why this next election is that important. That's why we need to get people from our community elected. That's why we need to have people in our community run. Because, even if you're in the blue dot in Texas, you can impact what happens in the rest of America. Because, there's two of us and there's many others that are out there trying to make sure that America doesn't look like the red Texas in a lot of ways, and the only way you can do that is by turning some of these seats. And so I think, even if you might be in today disempowered in Austin or right outside of Austin, keep building, because things change fast, but then also embrace the urgency of right now, where we need to stop the rest of the country from turning in that direction. And put a check on these guys in Washington right here, where by putting people in who can stand up and be a voice of reason and rationality.
I'll just echo that, really. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Courtney, and this is Heather. We're from Florida State University, and we've heard you all talk a lot about Republicans, Democrats, working class, but I have to ask about students, because I am a student. And we noticed, especially after the election of Donald Trump, a lot of students in the Middle East Center at our university, and just students in general, were very nervous about the ban and what his new policies on immigration were going to mean for them. I know this is a widespread fear among students in our country who are trying to finish their education and are facing the potential of maybe getting deported back to countries they've never remembered living in, and they haven't even finished their education. So that would be problematic for them to be a part of the working class. So we also vote. Students, a lot of students do vote in these elections. So how are you all planning to reach out to these students and coming and representing your population, validating their fears and assuring them that you're going to work towards keeping them within the confines of our country and at their institutions?
So I'll say, even though I only launched a couple months ago, I have a pretty steady stream of volunteers and interns who have already kind of been brought onto the campaign. And I would say 98% of them are under 30. So the younger generation, the millennial generation, is a very important piece for my campaign and for my candidacy. But students don't always vote, and unfortunately, a lot of times they are overlooked as a constituency and as a voting bloc. And so, I mean, we fully intend on working within the college campuses in and around the community. And actually, we already have some things on the calendar to go speak on campuses and find ways to engage like the Democratic groups and student Dem clubs on these campuses as well, and really bring them into the campaign, either as volunteers, as voters, whatever that they might be. But figuring out solutions to student debt is something I talk about very often as well. Figuring out, really talking about what are many pathways for students to be able to get an education and get quality education is an important piece of my message in my campaign. And for that matter, the University of Michigan, which isn't in my district, but where I went and just outside my district, was one of the first universities in the country to speak out against Trump's Muslim ban and say that they would not work with the administration to hand over information of students. And so I think continuing to empower universities like that to be able to take a stand against these Trump administrations, or the Trump administration's agenda. But students and younger people in the youth vote need to be more engaged as well. everybody wants your vote. Everybody wants you part of the campaign, and you all are a commodity, but you don't always vote. And, you know, I would really encourage you to get active on your campus, organize if you're not already. And you know, I'm always happy to take advice on how to do that, how to engage more young people into the campaign, how to bring out the youth vote. I do a lot on social media. I'm as active as I possibly can be. Obviously, that's one way, but that's not the only way.
So I'm running in one of the youngest districts in the country. The average age is 39. It's also one of the most diverse, as I mentioned earlier. It's 35% Latino, 30% Asian American, 2% African American, 2% Arab American. It's one of the most diverse and young districts in the country. We've got a congressman voting with Donald Trump 97% of the time. So a lot of this is telling the story of he just doesn't fit the community. We have 2 colleges in our district, Cal Poly Pomona, and we also have Cal State Fullerton. And so we have a large student population. And this last election, the 18 to 34 population was roughly 35% of the vote. The biggest question in these midterms elections with younger voters is, are they going to turn out? And I'm a firm believer as a millennial and as someone who still has student debt, that you turn out when you talk about the basics in the pocketbook of what people are worried about. There are only 3 candidates in my lifetime as a voter that even mention the word student debt: Barack Obama, Elizabeth Warren, and Bernie Sanders. Not surprisingly, they're 3 of the most popular candidates with people under the age of 35, because they're talking about the kitchen table issues that affect people. And so a lot of my campaign is that, because we do have a younger generation that has the lowest home ownership rate since the 1940s at 30%. You know, this is a generation that fell behind, isn't owning a home at rates before, has student debt and credit card debt that we've never seen in the history of this country. And when you do have people get married, if they have kids, good luck with childcare. It's too expensive. You know, unfortunately, last election, there were 2 candidates talking about childcare: Marco Rubio and Ivanka Trump. No one else. Like, we don't talk, as a Democrat, we don't talk about the basics of the economy and how you can get ahead and how you can have that American dream. And so a lot of my candidacy is essentially based on that. Because regardless of what generation you're in, you know what matters in terms of making sure people can still pay their bills, making sure people can own a home, and what that job market looks like. And so I think when you're talking to engaging young folks, you actually have to talk about what's in your pocketbook and looking at them as people who have the same concerns as everyone else, but, you know, drill it down. In terms of just more broadly, actually, I was talking to the LA Times about this on DACA, you know, with the Dreamer kids. And the thing with that was, what I told them was, this is an issue that's going to matter for young people in particular, because these are their classmates. They know this experience, just like you're saying you have classmates there. And so a lot of this, part of why I'm running is it's time for our generation to step up. You know, I mentioned earlier, this is the Arab American election because we can't be sitting on the sidelines anymore. It's even more the millennial election. Our generation has to take ownership of this country. If we're going to fight big picture issues like climate change, it's going to be because our generation stepped up. If we're going to still make sure the American dream is possible, where you can go to school, you can get a good job, and you can buy a home, and you can have a family, it's only going to happen if our generation steps up. No one in Washington is talking about these issues, which is why we have to get more young people out involved and actually have to be a voting bloc. But not just be a voting bloc because we turned down, we hate Donald Trump. Be a voting bloc because people are actually speaking to our issues. And so in my district, there's a little more luxury to talk about these issues, but people vote when you're talking about what hits them at home. And so I think that's how we get young people to vote, and then we actually go into the community and into the schools and talk to them.
Okay, we have about 5 more minutes left.
I just want to add one thing
sure,
on the students. I just get active on your campuses if you haven't already, especially in registration drives. You know, I mean, it's Sam is right. Students do vote, but they don't vote enough. They're still by percentage the lowest percentage of voters in the overall population, or the percentage of, you said it 18 to 34. I mean, I think if you go like 18 to 25, they're even lower, right? You know, so, you know, maybe there's creative ways to get voter registration drives at football games, or, you know, I mean, you'd have to obviously work with the administration on that. And I don't know what the rules are in the state of Florida for registration drives and what have you on campus, but those are the kind of things that you can look into. And, you know, maybe that's something that ADC can help provide some insight on. But being active among your friends and colleagues in terms of getting folks registered, or go volunteer on somebody's campaign. Even if you can't get out to California or up to Michigan, go volunteer on somebody's campaign down in Florida. And that's something that ADC can definitely help you with in terms of getting in touch with the right folks on a particular campaign. Any one of us up here, I mean, they're obviously going to be focused on their own campaigns, but I can certainly help, and ADC can help. But volunteer, even if it's just one weekend. You know, nice to do more. But again, that's an opportunity when you're volunteering and you're phone banking or you're canvassing a neighborhood. Inevitably, somebody's going to be like, "Where are you from?" Or, "Ayub, that's an interesting last name. What kind of last name is that? A Lebanese? Oh, is that hummus?" You know, I mean, that kind of stuff. I mean, again, that's all the stuff that you know really has people identify with our community when you get out and you do types of things like that. So I just would strongly encourage you to do that.
We have about 5 minutes left. I have two more people who'd like to speak, so I'm going to take them back to back, and then we'll finish up with one last comments from the panel. Okay. So let's go over here and then over here. I would ask you both to please keep it brief.
I understand you have been a candidate, but not in this country. But please concentrate on communities, organizations, small congregations, even if they are very small, especially Muslim communities. Even if you are not Muslims, that's okay, you know. But concentrate on them, and also be in touch with them. Even the mosques, go to the mosque, people in the mosque. There are a lot of wise people, well-educated people there, a lot of good students who like to pick themselves up and to help themselves and to help you. I know so many people there, especially in Orange County. I don't know many, but in Michigan there are a lot of young people who wants to help. And they help Arab people also. They help each other. So I wish you all the luck and good things, inshallah.
One more over here. Sure.
So I wanted to touch on what Eddie talked about earlier, about how to speak to Republicans, because I'm speaking as a Republican. And this is my first ADC event. I'm here because I'm just interested in learning about ADC's perspective on things, what the issues are. But, you know, when it comes to talking to Republicans and when you want to bring Republicans into the fold, you know, I'm a pro-immigration reform, pro-gay marriage, you know, Republican. I'm the kind of Republican that you probably would like to reach out to. But I feel like I'm at a Democratic Party event. And I'm not interested in coming to a Democratic Party event. I'm interested in coming to an event, an Arab American event, talking about issues that affect Arab Americans. Because ADC existed before Donald Trump was president. ADC existed under Barack Obama. They existed under George W. Bush. I don't know when ADC was founded, but presumably under Bill Clinton. These issues are not unique to this particular administration. Some might be in certain aspects. But these are issues that the community has faced for a long time. So if ADC truly wants to bring Republicans into the fold and perhaps right-of-center independence, then some of the rhetoric has to change. I'm not interested in coming to an event to talk about how terrible Trump is. You know, I'll admit I voted for Trump. My family voted for Trump. My father's family is Lebanese, 100%. They voted for Trump. But it doesn't mean that they're not receptive to what's being discussed here. But if the discussion is about how terrible Trump and Republicans are, you're going to lose them. So moderate the tone a little bit. I understand in your districts, you know, certain things play better in front of certain audiences, but moderate the tone a little bit, because I've experienced some of these things, not a lot of what other people have experienced, but in college, I was the vice president of my university's Arab Cultural Association. That was on my resume when I first came to DC and was looking for jobs on the Hill. And I had an office that refused to talk to me because that was on my resume. And I've gotten into arguments with people about how absurd it is that Sharia law is penetrating the country. It's just completely ridiculous. But I'm also a former Hill staffer. I worked for 2 Republican senators, and all that being said, not once did I ever see any meeting requests from ADC or AAI come across my desk. And I couldn't guarantee my member would take the meeting, but as a staffer, I would have definitely taken the meeting because I'm interested and I'm curious. But if there's no effort to engage, and if all the rhetoric coming out is anti-Republican, anti-Trump, you're going to lose people like me. And I'm happy to speak out on things that ADC cares about, but I'm not going to do it if the organization talks about how terrible Republicans are and things like that. So I just wanted to put that 2 cents in. I mean, there are issues that you guys have discussed here today that I care about, but I just, you know, for the sake of widening the tent, I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Just from the organization, we were actually founded under Ronald Reagan, 1980. But we do, in fact, I'll let you guys say, but we do, in fact, reach out to Republicans. In fact, we've worked very closely with Flake's office and who else? A bunch of other, few others?
Yeah, so Flake, Amash, as well as, oh my God, I forget his name right now. But those are the two main ones.
Yeah, so we have been reaching out to congressional offices because we understand that you know, politics is a pendulum. One day the Republicans are in power, the next day is Democrats, and we need to work under both administrations. We worked under the Bush administration. We worked with a Bush Department of Justice, and we've reached out several times to the current DOJ unsuccessfully, unfortunately. But go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just make a couple comments and I'll turn it over. I mean, I think part of your comment relates to what we were talking about here in Texas. Is the fact is there are more Republican legislators than Democratic legislators, so you have to engage everybody. You can't just limit it to one or another. You mentioned when you were a chief of staff that the organizations weren't walking in your front door, especially as a freshman member. I would say, you know, if we had a Republican candidate up here, I think you would hear a more balanced, if you will. These are two candidates, just from a purely political perspective, two candidates who are running in Democratic primaries. So the fact is, that is the rhetoric that is going to be persuasive, if you will. I mean, I will say this as a Democrat. I've tried to keep my comments here as objective as possible, but there is the same debate now going on within the Democratic Party that I think you saw within the Republican Party maybe 6 or 8 years ago that saw the rise of the Tea Party. Is you have some aspects of the Democratic Party who just don't, if you even hint that you're a member of Congress willing to work with this president, you may not be successful when you run for re-election. I don't like that because I came from a time when Democrats and Republicans worked together when I worked in the Congress. But that's just the political reality. So maybe those are things that I can say in a certain way that you may want to say a little bit differently. But if the point is that as a community, we need to be reaching out to everybody, because the simple fact is Republicans control this town right now. As a Democrat, I may not like that, but if you want to get anything done in this town, you have to talk to Republicans. Simple as that. So I guess I would say, not as someone who represents ADC, but is on an ADC panel, this is a political panel, not so much an ADC policy panel, and we have two Democratic candidates. So I think you're going to hear things on this particular panel because you have two Democratic candidates that you may or may not hear on previous panels that were focused on policy per se, what have you. But having said that, and I also don't want to ignore the comments that you were making over here as well.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to briefly comment on that. It's a reality on both sides that our community's not visiting. I mean, I worked in the Senate, same thing. Our community's not, very rarely, if ever, out there in meeting with a lot of these offices when, for a lot of these members, there is that curiosity. I think you're spot on that. And I think more broadly, in the environment we're in, there's a lot of economic anxiety that both parties have kind of helped create. But, as candidates, we are speaking to building out our campaigns, and, a lot of it is going to focus on who's president, just as a reaction. But more broadly, we have to get an economy that's actually working regardless who's in there. In my district, it's a 50-50 district, so I'm talking to everybody, and a lot of it really is on that economic message of, can you create jobs and you can get ahead for the next generation?
So I think too, Eddie's point, yes, we're both running as Democratic candidates, and a big part of what it has pushed us to run right now is because of our dissatisfaction with what's happening with the current administration. I'll say though, like I'm not looking to run an anti-Trump campaign. I'm looking to run a campaign on the message, like Sam was just saying about his campaign as well, that people are going to relate to, and with a positive message that talks about how we are going to move forward from here. And I think we both said that, finding those common themes. What are the common threads? What do we all believe in? How do we all want to find progress and move forward together? So I'm tired of the negativity as well. We really want to talk about change and moving forward. And as someone who's been engaged in a very nonpartisan fashion as a community activist and kind of doing civic engagement in the community, we've always pushed to work with members on both sides of the aisle. When we do leadership development trainings, we're not training people on being Democrats or Republicans. We recognize the need to be really represented in both parties. And, you know, I think us as individuals just have certain affiliations and are running as Democrats for certain reasons, and so maybe that's come out as more. But I mean, I like I said earlier, I have many Republicans from the community and outside the community who are seeing a need for change, and it's, you know, wanting to support me, not because I'm a Democrat or because I've been bashing Republicans, because I actually haven't been doing a lot of that, but because they believe in my message.
I think that's it. I just say one wrap-up comment too, though. I think this last point of discussion really does show how diverse our community is. I mean, we talked in the previous panel about the diversity based on race or ethnicity or religion or what have you, but we also have diversity in this community based on our own political beliefs and our political ideology. That's just, to me, that just shows how American we are, that we have those kind of diverse political opinions within our community. That's just what proves that we're just as American as anybody else, right? Because every other ethnic community has those same diversities of opinion.
Okay, on that note, thank you to the panelists. We're going to take a programming note. We're going to take about a 10-minute break, and then we're going to start the next panel, which is on the media. So hope to see you back in about 10 minutes. Thank you.
You school in D.C. or? Florida State. Oh, okay. I'm from Florida too. Like Fort Lauderdale. Yeah. Oh, okay, cool.
The American-Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee also looked at the recent events in Charlottesville, Virginia, between white nationalists and counter-protesters. This portion includes graduates from the University of Virginia and community organizers discussing their efforts to address racism. This is just over an hour.
Good evening. My name is Yolanda Rondon. I'm a staff attorney with the American-Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, and it's truly my honor to present our last panel for this evening, Charlottesville, the Reemergence of White Supremacy, particularly because of what we've seen in the last 3 years alone about violence occurring not only in the Arab American community, but mass violence against African Americans. And African American communities has been one of our crucial allies in our fight against the Muslim ban, with many of our community members working with Black Lives Matter, but as well as being prominent members of the NAACP and the ACLU. Particularly this summer, we've seen the outcry and the mass violence that occurred in Charlottesville with the uprising at the campus. Particularly we've seen, as we know, particularly we've seen, as we know, the brutal behavior and nature of people exercising their freedom of speech and their right to assemble and their right to protest. So today I'm honored to present this panel here. Particularly we'll be having Jeffrey Fogel, a civil rights attorney working in Charlottesville, Virginia, who will be moderating this panel. And with that, I hand it over to Mr. Fogel. Just introduce you.
As we go along. Charlottesville is a bucolic college town. If you believe the University of Virginia and the leadership of the community. But it, like much of the South, has a terrible history of race relations. And I'm not just talking about slavery or even Jim Crow. We're talking about the destruction of a whole community in the period of urban renewal. And we're looking at a professional class that now runs the city, none of whom are from the city, but who talk a good game but produce very little. And so we have an African American population that is really second-class citizens in Charlottesville. And so in a way, it's sort of strange that the Nazis would come to Charlottesville in order to protest the removal of the Robert E. Lee statue. I'm sure you've all seen video of what transpired that day. But the town fathers and mothers professed to be liberals and in fact ultimately voted to take that statue down. What they haven't voted to do, however, is provide adequate housing, do something about the incredible discrepancy in wealth and income and outcomes, medical outcomes, infant mortality rates, life expectancy rates. Now we have a terrific panel here today, all of whom were involved in what happened in Charlottesville, and we're talking about a period of 2 months here. July 8th, when the Ku Klux Klan had a rally. August 11th, when several of the students who were students at the time were in front of what's called the Rotunda, which is the main building that was designed by Thomas Jefferson surrounding his statue, when they were attacked by the so-called alt-right. And we have people here who were present on the day of August 12th, when all of the SHIT went down. And so I think you're going to get a very good perspective from people about what their reactions were and what happened. The more difficult question, particularly for those of us who lived through that, is what does this reflect about America? I mean, we're very close to having seen Nazis coming down the street with semi-automatic machine guns, with militiamen standing there with assault rifles, and with people from the alt-right there with all kinds of guns and other forms of weapons. And so it's quite a shock to be confronted with that directly. And it makes it difficult to take a step back and see where that fits into what's happening in America. But I don't think anybody doubts that the election of Donald Trump fed this kind of belief in the people who protested in Charlottesville that they actually have the ear of the president and that it's okay in this country in 2017 to be a white supremacist. So with that introduction, let me start with, well, let's do it chronologically in a way. We can start with Ibi Han, who was a student at the time, who's since graduated, fortunately, for her, certainly, who was present the night before the major demonstration at the university surrounding the Thomas Jefferson statue. And Ibi can tell you what happened and what her perspective is on what that reflects.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me here. So I just graduated from the University of Virginia, and throughout this summer had been going back and forth to Charlottesville to organize the response with some of the students who I've been with while in my undergrad. So I had come down that Friday night of August 11th to prepare for the 12th. I was there in a street medic capacity. So street medics are basically folks who have some kind of medical training who aren't necessarily with like the rescue squad. They kind of act as like battlefield or combat medics who are in the thick of the situation. So my role for August 11th and 12th was as a street medic. So that Friday night we had found out the information had started being passed around that Nazis were going to march from the field, one of the main fields at UVA, to the Thomas Jefferson statue. This had not been planned. This had not been publicly announced by them. But the information had gotten out probably around 6 or 7 p.m. that night that they were going to march at 9:30 p.m. And so the students, we were all together and we were like, we can't like, we can't let this happen. Like, we can't have hundreds of neo-Nazis marching through our campus, UVA's campus. And at the time, we were really unsure of what was going to happen, so we grabbed a banner that said,